want your soul.
When I first got the job, I couldn't believe my luck. I was a very solitary person. I loved to read and be alone. When I saw an ad for a park ranger manning a fire tower, I just about jumped out of my skin. Working overnight at a Walmart wasn't exactly the best job in the world. There are some stories I could tell about that as well, but I applied for the job and was ecstatic that I got it. They made me do a week of training before my first shift. Most of it was dry reading and making sure I was qualified in CPR. They showed me the job's ins and outs, and then I followed in my car as we drove to the tower. In the middle of the day, it was awe-inspiring to stare up at the underside of the tower, looming above me, suspended high in the air by the metal pylons. Once I started climbing the narrow metal stairs with hints of rust at the edges, I was somewhat less than excited. In fact, I was terrified. I don't like heights very much. It's not like I go all vertigo or anything, it's just I prefer to stay on the ground. Once we reached the top and pushed open the trap door to get onto the deck that surrounded the tower, I was doing a little better. I opened the door that led into the tower's interior. Looking around the room made me forget all about the terrible climb. It was like a small apartment. There was a small refrigerator, sink, counter, cupboards, and a small table. In the center of the room was a table with a map, permanently attached to it. Of course, there were windows all around. There was a 360-degree view, as you would expect for a fire tower, in the middle of a state park. The view was absolutely amazing. I could see the peaks and valleys for miles in every direction. It was a photographer's dream. The other ranger explained what was expected of me. We worked 24-hour shifts, so there would be times I would have to sleep. But I had to get an alarm and get up to scan for problems at least once per hour during the night. During daytime hours, I had to scan every 30 minutes. There was a radio to report any trouble and a phone in case I needed to call the fire department. In my mind, I was already drooling at the thought of getting paid to take amazing pictures and sit around reading books. The ranger told me that it was extremely important that I read the rule book first thing. He asked if I had any questions and I said no. He reinforced that I could not leave the tower, no matter what, until I was relieved. I followed him down the narrow staircase to get my supplies from my car. He got in his truck and hesitated for a moment as if he wanted to say something else, but then he shut the door, wished me well, and drove away. It took me 3 trips to get all my stuff up to the top. At home, it's nothing to bring a few boxes of groceries into the house, but here, it became life and death. I was near the top with the box in front of me when I stumbled on one of the narrow steps and nearly fell over the side. I paused for a long moment to regain my balance before continuing to the top. It suddenly struck me that this job might not be the cakewalk I thought it was. I pushed that thought to the back of my mind and went for my next 2 loads. Basic supplies, books, phone chargers, camera. Once I was up for good, I collapsed into the chair. I was on my way to Napland when I heard static on the radio, and I jumped up and grabbed it. "Hello?" I said, but no one answered. I figured this was the ranger's subtle way of reminding me it was time to do a check, but lugging 3 loads up the tiny stairs of death had put a serious crimp in my fire watch time. In fact, it had been nearly an hour since the other ranger had left. I did my slow pan around the room, checking each part of the forest for smoke and seeing none. Having successfully completed my first go-round, I celebrated with a bottle of water while I put the groceries away. The cupboards weren't empty, but they weren't a gourmet's delight either. Nearly a full shelf of baked beans didn't exactly thrill me, but I had the supplies that should do me for a few shifts. I sat the bread on the counter and loaded the cold cuts into the fridge. I would get some more options the next time I went shopping. By the time I finished putting things away, it was time for another check. The sun was starting to set, so I grabbed my camera and took some amazing pictures. I couldn't wait to upload them to my computer at home. As I looked around the room, my eyes landed on the manual. I realized I hadn't read it yet. I sighed, picked it up, and took it over to the chair. I was sure it would have me out cold in no time. As I opened the book, a piece of notepaper fell out. I picked it up carefully and read, and it said, "The real rules." Rule number 1. Never, under any circumstances, leave the fire tower until you are relieved. Rule number 2. Turn off all lights between the hours of 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Rule number 3. If you receive a radio transmission or phone call between those hours, do not answer, ever. Rule number 4. If anyone knocks on the trap door during those hours, tell them they'll have to wait until morning. Do not open the door, ever. Rule number 5. If you see a glowing object floating toward the door, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. Rule number 6. If animals surround the tower, don't go down to look. Fire your flare gun into the air twice 1 minute apart, and then lock yourself in the bathroom and hope for the best. I sat the note down and stared at it. What the fuck is going on here? Were they just having some fun with the new guy? I wasn't looking forward to getting hazed at 2 o'clock in the morning, I can tell you that much. I put the note back in the book and skimmed through the manual. It was a real snooze fest of standard rules and bullshit. For the next check, I decided to use binoculars. I was rewarded by seeing a bear and 3 deer. I pulled out my camera and took some pics, but the zoom wasn't quite as much as I needed to get some really good shots. You could still tell it was a bear, but it was a bit blurry. I decided to go camera shopping with my first paycheck on my day off. What's the use of having this spectacular view if I can't take pictures of it? Soon after sunset came the twilight. The sky lit up a brilliant orange. I took some more pictures and did my scan. I was just about to go inside when I noticed a thin wisp of smoke in the distance. I grabbed my binoculars and tried to get a better view, but there were too many trees in the way. I pulled out my compass and got a general direction, and then grabbed the radio and called the ranger on duty. I told him I had a fire, and gave the direction and general distance. He acknowledged it and said he would check it out. I stayed glued to my binoculars waiting to see the smoke lessen. Minutes seemed to take an eternity as the smoke continued to rise. Nearly a half hour later, the radio came to life. "Hey, rookie," the ranger said. Yeah, did you find it? Did you put it out? I still see smoke. Did I tell you the wrong place?" I said into the radio all in one breath. "Whoa there. Everything's fine. It was just a campfire." "A what?" "A campfire. It's nothing to worry about." Oh, a campfire," I repeated in a daze. "Yeah, you'll want to see more smoke, and it should be a lot thicker and darker before you call it in." I stood in silence, my face beet red with embarrassment. "Cheer up," the ranger said into the silence. "At least you didn't call the fire department." I looked over at the phone, knowing I was mere minutes from doing that very thing. Yeah, the fire department. Right. Yeah, sorry about that." "Don't worry, kid. At least you erred on the side of caution instead of letting the forest burn down." I put my face in my palm and shook my head. So much for a good first impression. Twilight had faded, leaving a few vestiges of light as the clouds transformed from dirty gray to black. I began to realize just how alone I was out here when the canopy of the night fully fell. Doing my checks from inside was nearly impossible. I had lights on, and every window I looked out of became a mirror of me looking back in at myself. Alone in a wooden box suspended 100 feet above the ground made it that much creepier. I stepped out onto the deck in the cool evening air. The total darkness was oppressive. I couldn't see anything. How was I supposed to see any smoke? I did a slow walk around the deck, looking out blindly at the trees. As my eyes adjusted, I was able to make out some shapes of the mountains and even the soft glow in the distance of the nearest town. That was small comfort to know that things still existed out in the world and I hadn't been plunged into this cover of darkness. I finished my check and stepped back inside. After being out in the darkness, it was way too bright. I turned off the main overhead light and the light over the entrance. The room settled into a comfortable glow with enough light to see but not blind. In fact, it was a little too cozy. I felt the nap coming on. I laid down on the surprisingly comfortable cot and closed my eyes. I woke up sometime later to static sounding on the radio. I reached for the radio to answer it, but something in the back of my mind told me not to. I looked at my watch and it said 2:12 a.m. I froze. Looking around the lit room, I thought about the strange rules I had read earlier. I reached up and turned off the light, plunging the room into total darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I looked out the window and could swear I saw someone peering in at me. Just then, I heard static on the radio. There was a voice trying to get through, but it seemed too weak. I waited to see if they would call again, and a minute later static sounded again. And beneath it, I heard the voice. It was a little stronger this time. I could just make it out. "Help me," it said in a feeble yet insistent voice. I reached for the radio, but something made me glance at my watch first. It was 2:23 a.m. I faltered and didn't answer. Those creepy fucking rules, I thought. What if they're real? I've already broken one by having the lights on. What happens when you break the rules? I sat in silence wanting to know the answer, but at the same time not wanting to know. The radio call came through again, but much more clearly this time. "Help me. Can anyone hear me? I need help out here." The voice sounded desperate. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It had a strange quality that I couldn't quite place. I fought the urge to answer, not knowing if I would be fired for dereliction of duty or not. I needed to answer, but my mind just wouldn't let go of those rules. The minutes ticked by like hours, and 3 more times the radio sounded out its plea, each time sounding more desperate. I watched the time, counting the seconds until 3 a.m. When the time finally came, I picked up the radio. "Whoever was calling for help, please state your position so I can relay help to you." "Who's this?" came the answer. "This is a park ranger manning a fire tower." "Well, park ranger, I've been on this channel all night, and yours is the first voice I've heard." Well, that's not possible, I thought. "I had several calls for help over the last hour." "Are you sure?" "Well, yes, of course. I wrote down the time of each call." "Then why didn't you answer them until now?" I paused. What could I say? Because a weird list of rules told me not to? I mean, that'd be ridiculous. "Ranger, are you there?" I had extenuating circumstances." "Extenuating circumstances?" The voice repeated as though tasting my words. "And what circumstances would those be?" Whoever this was, they weren't going to let it go. "Well, I'm not at liberty to say." "You mean like falling asleep and breaking the rules?" the voice said, sounding deeper, raspier, and more menacing. I froze. I hadn't turned the lights on yet, leaving the room in eerie darkness that left me feeling very exposed. I slowly panned around the room, looking out the windows and remembering the earlier feeling of being watched. "You can look all you want, but you won't see me," the voice said. "It's after 3 a.m., I said, hoping the terror I felt wasn't evident in my voice. "You have no power over me." The voice chuckled, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Normally you'd be correct, however, you broke the rules." "Well, what if I didn't know about the rules?" I said, grasping at straws. "Nice try, but you knew that you should be safe after 3 a.m. Fuck. It picked up on that. "Okay, so, what do you want?" "We're hungry." This time it sounded like many voices speaking at once. "Come on down out of that tower and let us feed." My legs turned to rubber as I stumbled over to the door and stepped out onto the deck. The moon was rising half full, casting light into the darkness. I looked down and saw over a dozen large animals surrounding the tower in a circle, and each one of them was looking up at me. I dove back inside and locked the door. I frantically searched for the flashlight, and once I found it, I picked up the phone to call the ranger station. There was no dial tone, though. I hung up and tried again, but still nothing. I pulled out my cell phone, but there was no signal. I paused to clear my head for a minute. Okay, you're freaked out right now, but what's actually happened? Nothing. Just some fucking weirdo on the radio, some animals around the tower, and this weird-ass list of rules that's making you paranoid. Calm down. Just then, I looked outside and there was a light off in the distance that looked like an airplane. The problem was it was heading straight toward me. It was mesmerizing. I found myself staring into the rapidly approaching glow until I realized it was going to ram into the tower. I found the best cover I could on the opposite side of the room and surrounded myself with as much furniture cover as possible. Being that the furnishings were sparse, that meant I dragged the chair over in front of me. I covered my eyes and hoped for the best. I may or may not have mumbled one of those "I promise I'll be good if you get me out of this" prayers. The seconds tumbled into minutes, and nothing happened. I peeked over the edge of the counter and the light was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief and wondered why I hadn't heard any engine sound. I decided it was because I was too busy ducking for cover. Then it hit me. I grabbed the manual and pulled out the list of rules, and there it was, rule number 5. If you see a glowing object floating toward the tower, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. I read over the rules again and again and realized how many had come to pass. For a long moment, I thought that maybe it was an elaborate joke. Some of the rangers yanking the rookie's chain, but there was too much I couldn't explain. The radio transmissions, the glowing light, the animals surrounding the tower. And then I realized I had broken that rule too. I hadn't fired the flare gun as instructed. I dug through the cupboard where the emergency supplies were kept and found the gun. I grabbed 2 flares and stepped out onto the deck. As I questioned the intelligence of firing flares that could end up causing a forest fire when I was supposed to be trying to prevent them, I heard a strange sound. I held my breath and cocked my ear for a better listen. It wasn't just one sound, it was many. I glanced over the side of the rail toward the ground and saw animals, all growling and pawing at the ground, working themselves in a frenzy. I backed away and loaded the first flare, then pointed up and fired. It rose majestically, glowing blood red until gravity slowed its ascent and pulled it back to Earth. I watched closely to make sure not only that it went out, but where it landed, just in case. I waited a minute and fired the second flare, watching where it landed as well. I stepped back inside and hid in the bathroom as instructed. I knew in my heart that I was safe from whatever was going on outside, as long as I didn't go down the steps. The radio sounded off, scaring me nearly half to death. "Fire tower number 5, the voice said. "Have seen your flares. I'm on my way. Are you physically injured?" No, I'm not at the moment. I'll explain when you get here." "Roger that. I'm en route." I tried to calm my nerves by thinking about what job I would apply for next and how unfortunate it was that this one didn't work out. I thought about what I was going to tell the ranger when he got here. There's no way I could tell him the truth. But what else could I say? There were some animals at the bottom of the tower that scared me. I mean, what the fuck? I honestly considered calling him back and telling him not to come when I felt heavy footsteps on the bottom stairs of the tower. I must have been daydreaming and let time slip by. I stepped out of the bathroom and went to the trap door. "Are you here already?" I said into the radio as I reached down to unlatch the door. That was fast. "What are you talking about?" came the clear answer over the radio. "I'm not there yet." I paused as I felt the footsteps come closer to the top. "Well, where are you?" I said quietly. "Oh, I'm probably a mile away. I can barely see the tower." His words hit me like a sledgehammer. I looked down at the bolt I was about to unlatch and pulled my hand back very slowly from the trap door. "Which direction are you coming from?" I said into the radio. "Southeast." I looked in that direction and sure enough, I could see headlights approaching. The radio sounded again, but with a slightly different voice. "Tower, ignore that last transmission. I'm already here. Let me in, please. I stared down at the trapdoor as though it wanted to bite me. Tower, let me in, it said more insistently. I backed away as something began beating on the trapdoor with tremendous force. The board shook with every impact. I stepped inside and locked the door, then barricaded it with my only loose piece of furniture, the chair. Tower 5, Tower 5. I don't know who that is talking to you, but it isn't me. I'm not there yet. Do not open that door. Repeat, do not open that door. I backed into the bathroom with a flare gun in hand and locked the door. The pounding on the trapdoor became louder. I knew it couldn't take much more of a beating. The whole room shook with every impact. I closed my eyes and prayed in earnest this time. And then my salvation came in the form of the engine sound of a pickup truck. I knew the real ranger was here. I listened as it came closer and then stopped. There was an awful silence for a moment and then gunfire, over and over, multiple shots in rapid succession. Then there was a lull followed by more shots. The pounding on the trapdoor had stopped as soon as the truck pulled up. The coast is clear, Ranger. You can open the door now, came a voice over the radio. I put my hand on the knob, smiling to go out and greet my savior when I heard a weak transmission. Don't. Not me, it rasped. A heartbeat later, the screaming began. It was a gut-wrenching scream of terrible suffering. I could hear it beneath me. All I could do was drop to the floor and curl up in a ball as the screaming went on and on. I closed my eyes and tried not to imagine that poor ranger being ripped to shreds by God knows what. Soon the screams lessened in volume and intensity, as though they were moving away. I rocked back and forth, hugging my knees, until unconsciousness mercifully took me. I woke to strange voices calling my name. I opened my eyes and I was surrounded by people in blue uniforms. I panicked and backed away from them as fast as I could, until my back hit a wall. Calm down, one of them said. It's all right. I looked around the room like an animal that had been backed into a corner. I was ready to fight my way out if I had to. Are you injured? He said. My mind raced to remember where I was. I looked out the window and it was morning. The sun was shining and I could see blue clouds. Everything from last night came back to me in a rush. I looked around the room and saw nothing out of the ordinary. No, I'm not injured, I said to the EMT. Well, can you tell us what happened here? A ranger said from behind them. I looked over at the manual that contained the list of rules and for a minute considered telling him to read them. No, was all I said instead. Can I go home now? The ranger glared at me, wanting answers and not getting them is frustrating, I know. Is he all right to drive? The ranger asked the EMT. They gave me the once-over, BP, lungs, heart rate, and didn't find anything to be concerned about. I'd say he's physically fine, the EMT said, and the ranger sighed. Yeah, all right, go ahead, but I'll want to talk to you tomorrow. I nodded and stood, gathered my things, and started toward the door. When I got to the open trap door, I hesitated, seeing it had been hacked open with an axe. I took a tentative first step, and then another. Surviving a night as I had only to fall down several flights of stairs would be quite ironic. As I made my way down, white-knuckling the railing the whole way down, I saw people busy at the bottom. They were picking up shell casings with gloves and putting them into plastic bags. I could see spots of blood here and there, but no bodies, either human or animal. I saw the trail of blood as it disappeared into the woods. I stood on the bottom step for a long time, wondering if I was allowed to step onto the ground. I then took the step and bolted for my car. I started it up and drove out of there as fast as I could, and just as I turned onto the gravel road, a deer walked out in front of me. I slammed on the brakes and slid to a stop mere inches from hitting it. It didn't move though, it just stood there staring at me. As I looked more closely, I could see blood on its nose and mouth. My heart skipped a beat when I saw a shred of a ranger's patch impaled on one of its antlers. Its eyes bored into mine as I slammed into reverse, then drive, and swerved around the deer, and broke every speed limit getting home. I called my boss and quit as soon as I got there. Then I packed and started looking for a job in the city. Maybe I can find a nice quiet warehouse to guard. but if it has a strange set of rules, I'm walking out. No questions asked. 149 stairs. That's how many there are to get up to the fire tower I'm posted at. I used to think getting up there meant safety. Now I'm hoping it just means survival. Climbing 149 steps when you're healthy is no small feat. When one of your legs has been torn to shreds, you're bleeding from many places and you're trying to get up there to wrap it, hoping there's enough bandages so you don't bleed to death. It's a lot more difficult. Then there are the stairs themselves, which also count as a hazard when you have to hop up each one, causing pain to shoot through your injured leg. The stairs are skinny enough as they are, but the closer you get to the top, the smaller they get. How do I know the exact number of steps? I counted them. I also counted which ones I miscalculated my jump, or brushed my foot against the step, or did something else that nearly sent me sailing over the rickety railing to my untimely death. The first time was one step number 3, then 15. 37 was a bad one, 52. 107, 120, and finally 143. I guess it's a good thing I'm deathly afraid of heights. By now you may have figured out I'm a park ranger. How did I end up playing this deadly game of hopscotch? Well, it started a week ago when I got the job. Apparently, they just had a new job opening for a fire lookout. I was super excited because I love working alone and I love nature. What other job blends those two so well? That excitement waned quite a bit when I arrived at the tower on my first day and looked up at those tiny metal steps I would have to climb to get to my job. The whole thing looked about as sturdy as if someone had built it with an erector set. I mean, honestly, seeing surface rust on stairs that have to support your weight is terrifying. And I had to wonder how much I would be swaying when the wind really kicked up. I wanted to close my eyes and just run up, but I didn't dare. I paid attention to every single step, watching the metal bow under the weight of my foot, white-knuckling the railings as I went. Finally, I reached the top and knocked on the trapdoor that had to be opened to let me in. I met the ranger who would be training me. His name was Bob, and he looked every bit how I envisioned a park ranger would look. Tall and thin, wiry but not scrawny, with a 5 o'clock shadow because he never had the time to shave properly. Bob was one of those guys who seem to always have a smirk on their face like they've just been told the greatest joke of all time, but they don't want to let you in on it. He spent the entire shift showing me around and then boring me to tears with all the little details of working in a fire tower. The place wasn't bad. I was expecting an empty room with a card table and a radio, but this was nice. It reminded me of a small apartment or the inside of a small RV. There was a kitchenette with a microwave, sink, and mini fridge. There was a couch and a couple of chairs, and most importantly, there was a bathroom. At one point, I thought there would be an outhouse at the base of the tower I would have to use. The thought of going down all those steps while holding number 1, or especially number 2, was something I didn't even want to have nightmares about. Just before the end of the shift, the next ranger came up. His name was Toby. Toby looked nothing like I envisioned rangers to look like. He was overweight, but made up for it by being tall. He had a look of mischief in his eyes like a 7th grader who had just dropped a cherry bomb down the toilet and was trying to walk away looking nonchalant. He smiled and shook my hand. "So, did Bob bore you to tears?" "Well, I wouldn't say tears." "Hey, I'm a good trainer," Bob said, looking offended yet still wearing that grin. "Did you tell him everything?" Toby said. "Pretty sure." "Did you tell him about—" Toby leaned closer and whispered something in Bob's ear that I couldn't hear. Bob's grin grew. No, I didn't tell him about that." Yeah, maybe we should wait until he's done training," Toby said. What's going on?" I said, looking back and forth between them. "We'll tell you once you're done job shadowing," Bob said with that infuriating grin. When we left, I was so focused on what they weren't telling me, I nearly missed the first step and plunged to my death. "Yeah, you're going to want to focus on those steps. We had a coworker get hurt really bad because of them," Bob said. "Is he okay now?" And Bob looked away. Then Toby chimed in and said, "Nope, he's dead." And that was definitely exactly what I wanted to hear. The next few days were a blur. Between total boredom with reading the procedure book and Bob grinning all the while refusing to tell me the big secret, I was getting super frustrated. I couldn't wait for my first night working alone. At least I had brought some supplies up to keep in the tower, some snacks, a few books, and a tablet to make some notes on if I started writing a story. Finally, the night came. I was working on my own for the first time, and surprisingly, Bob's smile vanished as he told me. "Did you ever read anything about any incidents that happened out here?" I shrugged. "Bob, I don't really read much other than books." "Yeah, okay, well I was just wondering, maybe if you'd seen some news or something." "Okay. Well, what's the big secret? You want me to read somebody's story?" "Well, it might seem made up, but trust me, there's some rules here and they need to be followed." I tried to read his expression to see if he was messing with me or not. In the 5 days I'd known him, there was never a time he wasn't wearing that stupid fucking grin until now. His face was serious as a heart attack. "All right. I'll look it up later on my phone. You really should do it as soon as I leave." "Okay, I will." "Well, good luck." He stepped over to the door and went down the stairs. A few minutes later, I heard his truck drive away. I mean, what the hell was that about? I stood in the middle of the room looking out at the beautiful trees, but not even seeing them. My mind was occupied with what Bob had said. This has to be a prank. Bob and Toby cooked this up to scare me on my first night. Well, I'm not falling for their bullshit. I did my first round of walking around on the outside walkway, looking for any sign of fires. We worked 12-hour shifts, so I was working from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It was late summer, and still warm enough to go without a jacket, at least on my first round. By the time I got to my fourth round, there was a chill in the air. I started doing my rounds from the inside and made a mental note to bring a jacket with me tomorrow. It seemed odd to be talking about a jacket in late summer, but in the forest, the temperatures can vary wildly. It could be 30 degrees at night and 80 degrees during the day. I stepped back inside and saw my phone had lit up with a text message. I looked at it and it was Bob. "Did you find the story yet?" "No, I didn't," I texted back. "Well, you don't have much time." I knew this was a joke. It had to be a joke. The old-timers pulling a fast one on the new guy, jerking his little chain. "Yeah, I'll get right on that," I texted. "You better," he shot back. I put my phone down and looked at the clock. It was 10 minutes after 10. Outside was now completely dark, creating a very disconcerting illusion that when I would look outside, all I saw was my reflection. I decided to turn some lights off and go with just the bare minimum. That reduced the reflection some and I could see some trees outside. I did a slow pan around, then grabbed a bag of chips and a soda, sat down, and worked on a crossword puzzle. That only lasted half an hour until I was bored with it. I then picked up a book and started to read. I woke up sometime later, with my head resting on the back of the chair, chip crumbs all over my shirt, and the book laying on the floor. I stretched and looked over at the clock. It read 2:13. I jumped up, flinging the bag of chips to the floor, realizing I'd missed several checks, then ran around the room staring out at the trees. After my quick lap, I took a breath and did another slower lap to make sure there was no smoke, and thank God there was none. I chided myself for falling asleep on duty like that as I cleaned up my mess. I then decided I should set an hourly alarm clock on my phone so that wouldn't happen again. When I picked up the phone, I noticed there was a series of texts from Bob. "Did you figure it out yet? Why aren't you answering? Are you all right? Don't open the door for any reason." That last one sent chills down my spine. What was he talking about? Why the fuck would I open the door in the middle of the night? As I was thinking this, another text came in. "For the love of God, look it up." What the hell was wrong with this guy? Was he seriously losing sleep over a stupid joke? Might have to report these fucking weirdos to HR. But I decided I would humor him and look up this news story. I opened my phone and went to the internet. I had just started searching when I heard static over the radio. I stepped to the receiver and checked it. Static blared out of it, making me jump as I heard a faint voice in it. "Tower 7, do you read me?" I heard from a voice I could barely hear through the static. I hesitated for a moment, trying to remember if this was Tower 7 or not. "Tower 7, do you read me?" the voice said, sounding a little more desperate. I picked up the mic and keyed it. This is Tower 7. Go ahead. It's good to hear you, Tower 7, the voice said, suddenly clear. I didn't think you'd answer. Well, here I am, awake and alert, answering you. What do you need? Oh, I already have what I need. I'd like to come visit if that's all right. Tower 7, this is Base. Who are you talking to? I don't know, somebody on the radio, I said into the mic. 7, there's no one else on this channel. I got chills for a moment. What did that mean? How was I hearing someone that Base couldn't? Why would someone be calling me now? And then it hit me that the Base dispatcher was probably in on this joke too. Yeah, okay, Base. Maybe it was just some random transmission. Tower 7. Am I all right to come in for a visit? I hesitated for a moment. What if this wasn't a joke? Who the hell is walking through the forest at 2:30 in the morning? Well, maybe we'll do that visit another time. A visit? Base said. What visit? 7, you know it's against policy to have visitors. Yeah, sorry, Base, I won't be letting anyone visit tonight. More static then came over the radio. I swear I could hear someone say something in the middle of it. It sounded like, we'll see. I put down the mic and picked up my phone to read a news story when I saw something off in the distance. It was a light, but it was hovering, like a helicopter. I switched my phone to camera mode, zoomed in, and took a picture. It was weird because the light was blue. I didn't think helicopters had blue lights on them. Also, this light wasn't flashing. It was solid the whole time. It came closer and I took another picture. It kept floating even closer, which was mesmerizing, and there was no sound. No hum, no whirring of tiny blades, keeping it afloat like a drone. No nothing. It was about the size of a basketball and glowing the most brilliant blue I'd ever seen in my life. I reached out for it, and it backed away from my hand. I took a step closer to the edge of the walkway, reaching out as far as my arm could stretch. It backed away a few inches, just out of reach. I then stood on my tiptoes, pushing against the railing trying to touch it. It moved away another inch. I reached a tipping point and pinwheeled my arms to regain my balance, and shoved back against the railing. I fell onto the walkway, landing hard on my backside and hitting the back of my head against the window. I looked up, and the light was gone. I shook my head, painfully stood up, and went back inside. I didn't want to do a patrol, but figured I'd better. After a slow walk around, I collapsed in the chair and set my alarm to go off in an hour. After sitting there for a few minutes, I could feel myself nodding off, so I opened my phone and started reading a local news story with a police report. After about 10 minutes, I lowered my phone, eyes wide and hands shaking. It can't be real. This is a joke. How did they do this? I scrolled back through the story and reread the rules. Rule number 1. Never, under any circumstances, leave the fire tower until you are relieved. Rule number 2. Turn off all lights between the hours of 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Rule number 3. If you receive a radio transmission or phone call between those hours, do not answer, ever. Rule number 4. If anyone knocks on the trap door during those hours, tell them they'll have to wait until morning. Do not open the door, ever. Rule number 5. If you see a glowing object floating toward the door, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. Rule number 6. If animals surround the tower, don't go down to look. Fire your flare gun into the air twice 1 minute apart, and then lock yourself in the bathroom and hope for the best. My skepticism started to waver. How could they have known about those things? Unless... There was a powerful banging at the trapdoor that made me jump. "Who is it?" I said, but no one answered. 1 minute later, the pounding resumed. I searched for anything I could use as a weapon. Digging through the silverware drawer and finding an old, dull paring knife, I backed as far away from the trapdoor as possible while staying inside. The pounding repeated. Somehow, through the fear that coursed through my veins, I found my voice. You'll have to come back in the morning." "But I'm here now, Tower," said the voice from the radio. "Let me inside." The last 3 words changed from asking to demanding. The voice also became deeper and more menacing. I didn't answer. I just slid down to the floor and hugged my knees, holding the knife in front of me, silently searching through the story on my phone to see if there was something I missed and what happened, some way I could remedy the situation. Where were the cops? Why wasn't this solved? Why didn't the Rangers just tell me what was going on and quit fucking around with me? But there was nothing. And at the end of the report, it didn't give me much hope either. I covered my ears and closed my eyes as the pounding continued, now mixed with a voice that was going back and forth between pleading and threatening. It whispered, and then it screamed. It sounded like a young boy, and then it sounded demonic. I rocked back and forth, trying to keep some measure of sanity as the assault continued. I began to wonder how long the trapdoor would hold before whatever it was broke through, and then it suddenly stopped. As happy as I was that there was no more pounding and yelling, I didn't trust it. My entire body was on pins and needles. It felt like the calm before the storm. Then, the fire tower shook. It felt like an earthquake, only different. I stood and went out to the walkway to see what was happening. When I looked down, I couldn't believe it. The tower was surrounded by animals of all kinds: deer, squirrels, bears, moose. Any forest animal you could imagine, and even a couple I couldn't and didn't want to identify. As I leaned over watching this strange menagerie, a moose rammed into one of the tower's legs. It sent a shockwave through the entire metal framework. By the time it got up to me, the tower was shaking so hard it made me lose my balance. I toppled over the edge and fell. I threw my arm out attempting to catch the rail, but only touched it with my fingertips. I knew I was falling to my death. There was no doubt. The wind rushing in my ears didn't drown out the sound of my screaming. It sounded odd, like I was listening to someone else scream. I closed my eyes, not wanting to know when the end was coming. Suddenly, something hit me hard in the ribs. I had hit a tree limb, but it didn't stop me. The branch broke, sending me falling again until I hit another branch. This one tore a gash on my leg as I flipped head over heels and fell again. The next branch grazed my head and made me see stars. I bounced off another branch, hitting my shoulder, then took one to the knee and landed flat on my back on the ground. I lay there dazed, injured, but alive and surprised to be so. As I tried to regain my bearings, I saw the animals rushing over to me. I doubted they wanted me to pet them, though. I jumped up as pain rocked my body from more places than I wanted to think about. I hopped over to the tower steps and began my long, arduous journey, just a half a step away from a bunch of rabid animals that seemed dead set on my destruction. About halfway up, I realized there was no more pursuit, so I slowly tried to conserve my energy. I got to the top, unlocked the hatch, and tried to push it open. It took several tries to get enough strength while balancing on one leg, standing on the tiniest of all the tiny steps. As soon as I got it open, I turned and slammed it shut, locking it. I hobbled into the room, found the first aid box, and struggled to get to the couch. I wanted nothing more than to curl up in a ball and forget this day ever happened. I tried to easily lay myself down, but ended up collapsing in an excruciating heap. Once down, I focused on bandaging the leg since it was losing the most blood. Once I was done, I proceeded to bandage all the rest of the areas that needed it. "How are you feeling, Tower 7? I heard a voice say over the radio, and I didn't answer. "Oh, come on now, Tower. Don't be like that. Talk to me. Let me in and we'll have a conversation." I lay there trying to think of anything other than pain in this voice. "There has to be punishment for disobeying the rules," the voice said. My blood ran cold. How did that thing know about the rules? I reached into my pocket and was astonished that my phone was there. It had a cracked screen but was usable, and so I texted Bob. "I'm alive somehow. I broke half the rules without knowing it because I read the story too late, and you also didn't tell me, because you and Toby are motherfuckers." "Are you all right?" he responded. I took pictures of my bandaged leg that was wrapped, but blood was still seeping through. I took pictures of my battered face as well and my bruised ribs and sent them all to Bob. Good Lord, man, what did you do? What did I do? What the fuck did you do, you asshole? I responded. I fell out of the tower because you didn't tell me about the rules. You did what? He shot back. I was leaning over the edge of the walkway when one of the animals smashed into the support leg and shook the tower, knocking me over. Well, how are you alive then? He texted. The tree caught me. I'll call the paramedics and come in early to relieve you. His message read. Well, I'll be laying on the couch bleeding. And then I added, I'll follow the rules from now on. Also, go fuck yourself. After I finished my text, I then heard static on the radio and a faint voice saying, You'd better. When Bob unlocked the hatch and led the EMTs in, he didn't have that grin on his face. You okay, kid? Oh, I'm just hunky-dory, Bob. How about you? I said, laying on the cushions that were soaked in my own blood. He might be in shock, one of the EMTs said. My rescue was an adventure in itself. When they examined me, they informed me that my leg was broken. I was sweating trying to go back down those steps with a splint on. I could just see me slipping near the top and falling again. There didn't seem to be any trees close enough to catch me on the side. Apparently, the EMTs seemed to be thinking the same thing. Someone came up with the brilliant idea of tying me to a backboard and trying to carry me down the steps. After 2 EMTs nearly fell, they decided to tie it to a rope and lower me like a sack of potatoes. They rigged up the rope around one of the support poles for the walkway. Watching the rope scrape along the edges of the wood, fraying as it went, was probably more terrifying than anything I'd experienced last night. Floating in the air, spinning slowly didn't help my fear of heights any either. I decided to close my eyes and try to stay as still as possible so the balance wouldn't be disturbed and slide me out of the end to fall to my death. I was extremely grateful when the board hit the ground. My adrenaline finally crashed and I fell into a deep sleep as they loaded me into the ambulance. Truth be told, I'm absolutely terrified to go back to that tower. Not only do I not like the rules, I don't trust the rangers either. But it's not like I have a lot of choices. It is a good paying job, and sitting around watching for fires is about the easiest job I've ever heard of. If you just take away the supernatural voices, bizarre wildlife, strange lights, and the stares of death, it's not that bad. I'm thinking of going back and maybe trying to follow the rules and hoping that'll keep me safe. Anyhow, it's just a summer gig after all, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a go. Till next time, folks. See you around on the other side.